from Vienna. I'm Courtney from the U.S. Mission to International Organizations in Vienna, and it's my pleasure to moderate this conversation today. We're talking about outer space and COPUOS, the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and I'm joined by three of the State Department's top outer space experts. David Turner, head of the U.S. delegation to COPUOS, Gabriel Swinney, head of the U.S. delegation to the legal subcommittee of COPUOS, and Caitlin Poling, UNVI political specialist. If you're joining us live, thanks for being here. Please put your questions below on our wall and we'll try to answer them throughout the conversation. And give us a like, a thumbs up, a smiley face if you're enjoying the conversation. Let's get started. Before I jump in with the space policy questions, I wanted to give everyone a chance to tell us what you do in your day job when you're not working on COPUOS. David, would you share, please?
Okay. So I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Space Affairs in the Department of State in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. So when I'm not here at COPUOS, I'm involved in a number of bilateral discussions with other nations. We have space cooperation with many, many nations. We also provide diplomatic support to other multilateral space activities, and I help manage an office staff of very competent and professional people who are also involved in space affairs. So that's what I do when I'm not here in Vienna.
Space all day, every day.
That's right.
Awesome. Caitlin.
Sure. So I'm based here at the U.S. Mission to the International Organizations in Vienna, or UNVI. My portfolio includes peaceful uses of outer space and arms control, especially the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. And so when I'm here in Vienna, I'm not working on COPUOS. I'm supporting our delegation's involvement in other conferences and fora based in Vienna, as well as working to build and maintain relationships with other diplomats here in Vienna.
And last but not least, Gabriel.
Yeah, so I'm an international lawyer at the State Department, and I handle international science and space cooperation. So that really means two things. One is supporting Dave's office as we negotiate international cooperative agreements with other countries and other space agencies. The biggest one I've worked on there is to build and construct the Gateway, a small space station that's going to orbit the moon. We negotiated those agreements. The other part of my work is thinking about what rules should apply in the future as we go into space and do new things. What are the rules we and our international partners should follow as we go there? So yeah, like you said, it's all space, all day. It's really fun life.
Oh man, I could talk about space all day. And I should also say, I work at UNVI with Caitlin, our U.S. mission, in our public affairs office, so I get to think about space on social media and talk to cool experts like you on topics as fun as outer space. So awesome. Let's get down to some of the questions. We're here for COPUOS. You're here in Vienna. What is COPUOS? How does it work? And who makes up the U.S. delegation?
All right, so I'll try to answer that. So COPUOS is the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. It's a United Nations committee that has actually existed since 1959, since almost as long as the space age. And COPUOS works by a consensus among the members of the committee. So anytime any activity is going to be conducted through the committee, it has to be with the agreement of all the nations that are part of the committee. In terms of the U.S. delegation to COPUOS, it's made up of any department or agency in the U.S. government that plays a role in space. Obviously NASA is the largest. But NOAA under the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Geological Survey, the Federal Aviation Administration under the Department of Transportation, they all participate. And we also bring with us many times advisors from the private sector, from the academic sector, anyone who has an important role to play in our space program at large.
Excellent, thank you. And what's the relationship between COPUOS and the subcommittees? So the scientific and technical subcommittee and the legal subcommittee.
So I can take that. COPUOS handles such a broad range of issues, everything from light pollution caused by satellites in space that interferes with optical astronomy, to legal rules relating to space resource utilization, and dozens of other topics there. And as more things happen in space, there's more topics for COPUOS to cover. So over the years, they've developed a practice of having two subcommittees, one that deals with those scientific and technical issues, and then another that deals with legal issues. And they meet separately in the early part of the year, and then all of those issues then are fed back together in the full COPUOS meeting, where national governments come at a higher level, usually in the summer, to sort of bring all those issues together. So that's how we've managed to handle the increasing workload, the increasing number of complex issues that the international community has to deal with in outer space.
And what role does the U.S. permanent mission play when there are big space meetings like COPUOS in Vienna?
Sure. So a big part of my work here at UNVI is helping support our delegations as they travel from Washington and other agencies throughout the states. It's everything from getting our delegation participant list over to the Secretariat, sending our statements and technical presentations, but then also doing some of the groundwork ahead of time, talking to other diplomats based in Vienna and helping convey to those who plan to come for our conference what type of issues and challenges we might expect during the conference.
Cool. Just went to check our wall and I could hear ourselves, so I didn't check the wall. But if you are watching and you're putting a comment up there, or if you have a question, please throw it on the wall or make a comment, and we'll try to get it probably at the end so I don't interrupt our conversation with the sound like I just did. All right, next up, what are the U.S. priorities for this year's COPUOS?
I can take that one. So our priorities this year are really basically the same priorities we have almost every year. We have a very consistent policy for space activities across multiple presidential administrations. And so I would say probably there are two major priorities for us. One is just to talk with the rest of the world about our space program and make it clear to nations that we are very open to international cooperation in our outer space activities. And then number two, to promote responsible behavior in outer space. And that means responsible and safe activities conducted not just by nations, but by industry, by anyone who is using space for peaceful purposes.
Thank you, and that's actually a good transition to the next question that we had received in advance, which is about the Artemis Accords. So how are we, as the U.S. delegation, the U.S. government, and our partners highlighting the Artemis Accords during COPUOS?
Sure, I can talk about that. For those who don't know, the Artemis Accords are the set of commitments that we and our closest partners have developed, talking about how we'll behave in outer space, particularly when we go to the moon and then onwards to Mars. It's a set of rules that we've all promised to live by. And COPUOS is a great example of how all that comes together. As countries come, and as Dave said, they talk about their space programs, and they talk about the missions they plan to do, many of which are cooperative missions. They're now talking about the rules they'll abide by when they do those things. Not only will we go to the moon and extract resources, not only will we have scientific exploration, but there are things we won't do. We won't interfere with human heritage sites. We won't interfere with each other's operations. So the United States is highlighting that. We talk about the Artemis Accords. The other 11 signatories are talking about it every time they talk about their operations. And then we also come together and do cooperative presentations, technical presentations. There's a beautiful display in the rotunda, thanks to our mission here. We have brochures, and we really spend a huge amount of time talking with the public and other delegations to explain the benefits, just as Dave said, of behaving responsibly in outer space, and not only doing it in your own mind, but articulating to the world what those rules are that you're going to live with.
Thank you. And speaking of guidelines and rules, let's talk about the long-term sustainability guidelines. What are they exactly, and what's the status of them?
Sure, I can take that one. So the long-term sustainability guidelines, or LTS guidelines, are a set of 21 non-binding and voluntary measures and norms that were developed by the committee in 2019 and adopted by the full UN General Assembly. They look to address establishing norms for safe and responsible behavior in outer space as it becomes an increasingly complex environment, and particularly through international cooperation. It took about 10 years to develop, and right now we're focusing on the next phase, which is implementation and capacity building, and really looking at how can we help the international community understand the guidelines, and all space actors start putting them from paper into practice.
So just to tie this to a previous question you asked, implementing these guidelines is a concrete example of promoting responsible behavior in space.
And a demonstration of the value COPUOS can add,
Absolutely.
right? So that you develop the guidelines, and then every nation has one set of guidelines that they can go back and then not only implement, but then come back and report on. So it's sort of a circular process
Yes.
of implementation that reinforces itself.
And you mentioned at the beginning the makeup of the U.S. delegation. We've also, throughout the course of this conversation, talked about how the U.S. engages in on an international level, how we cooperate with other countries. So can you maybe talk a little more about how the different U.S. interagency partners collaborate to make space policy on a domestic level, and then on a zooming out a bit, then how does that come into play when we're engaging on the multilateral level with other countries doing the same thing in each of their individual countries? Same countries doing that in their individual countries, but I think you...
Yeah, so we what you're asking us, and I gotta give Gabriel credit for saying this, is you're asking us how do we make the sausage?
Yeah.
How does space
Exactly.
policy happen? And it's not that, frankly, it's not that exciting to talk about, but it's always a collaborative process across the executive branch of the U.S. government, and many of those departments and agencies I already mentioned bring their experts to a committee or a working group. It has different terms and different titles in different presidential administrations, but basically we all come to the table together and talk about making minor changes to previous policies that try to keep up with the activities that are happening in outer space and try to keep up with the rest of the world. And so it's a deliberative process. It's a group of experts from across the government working together, and that's how we do it. Now, our department, the State Department's job, is to take that domestic process and then figure out how to explain it to other nations. And this is one of the places that we do that, COPUOS.
You know, there's a perception, I think, sometimes among people around the world that the United States government always does things for political reasons, or that it's all about sort of political gain. And although each one of us around the U.S. interagency, of course we have political bosses, but the people sitting in those rooms making those decisions are almost always career experts. You know, we're not elected, we're experts in law or policy. We have scientists and engineers who show up at these meetings. And that's how 99.9% of these decisions get made, is career experts trying to figure out what's the right answer for a difficult question. And then we send those up to the politicals, and almost always they say, yeah, if that's your recommendation, that's what we'll do. So yeah, it's sort of boring, I guess, from the outside, but it's also a little bit inspiring, I think, to see that these decisions really aren't influenced by politics, at least not always, maybe not in the same way that some people think they would be.
Great answer. So I think we have a question on our wall. I'm going to try to pull it up, and we're going to hear ourselves for a second here. So I can turn the volume off. Okay. So question from Amy. Do the Artemis Accords focus solely on engagement with other governments, or does it touch on engagement with commercial entities as well?
That is a tough question. Yeah, because regulating commercial companies is a lot harder than telling yourselves what to do, right? We're a government. We can adjust our own missions, whether it's NASA or NOAA or U.S. Geological Survey. We can plan those ourselves. Regulating commercial companies has all kinds of implications about their business models and sort of so on and so forth, and you don't want to create disincentives for companies based in different countries. So what we've tried to do with the Artemis Accords is frankly lead by example, right? Say the Artemis Accords are about civil exploration of space, which is mostly NASA and its international counterparts. So So we've tried to develop a set of rules that we think are good ideas. We, the United States government, also our international partners. But we're going to start by applying them just to that civil exploration and see how it goes, quite frankly. There's parts of the Artemis Accords that need to be further articulated, further developed. And we can use those civil exploration activities to test it out, further develop those ideas. And then if they work, some of those ideas are tools that we might then choose to apply at a national level to our own commercial actors. So that's a to be determined, I think. Right now the focus is on civil exploration because just as these activities are brand new, so are the rules. And we're going to have to figure out what we're doing just like the engineers and scientists are figuring out what they're doing.
But I would just add, we are ready and willing to talk to our Artemis partners about how they will apply the principles in the Accords to their own private industry. I mean, this actually does tie back to COPUOS. The committee was responsible for negotiating the Outer Space Treaty, which provides the basis for everything that we do. And that treaty clearly states that activities in outer space are the responsibility of nations, regardless of whether it's NASA conducting the activity or a private entity in the case of the U.S. So, as Gabriel said, we will work on applying the Accords principles to our own industry, and we are very willing and happy to talk to our partners about doing the same.
Speaking of partners, there are currently 12 Artemis Accords signatories at the moment, including the United States, correct?
Yes.
In 10 years or 20 years, how many signatories do you hope, or do we, estimate? This is just guessing at this point, but how many do you think we'll have, or do we hope we'll have?
I don't think that, to be honest with you, the number is not what's important. What's important is that any nation that is interested in joining us in exploring outer space does so, as I said earlier, safely and responsibly, and that's what the Artemis Accords are all about. So we would welcome any nation either signing the Accords or just publicly acknowledging that they believe that the principles in the Accords are important and will be followed in their own space activities. So.
No, that's exactly right. You took the words out of my mouth. Success isn't about number of signatures, although that's a start, because number of signatures indicates commitment. But what success really looks like over the next generation is compliance with the principles, is responsible behavior. Whether countries sign the Accords or not, if they behave in a way that implements the obligations set out in the Outer Space Treaty, hopefully in a way that's compatible with the same ways we try to implement those obligations, that's success. Right? So the Artemis Accords are trying to lead the way, but it's not really about signatures at the end of the day. It's about that behavior and that result.
Thank you. I have another question on our wall. What other topics will be discussed at COPUOS meetings this week? So we talked about Artemis Accords, we talked about the long-term sustainability guidelines. What else is on the agenda or has been discussed?
So I guess, and Gabriel, Caitlin, decide if you want to jump in here, but two other things that have been on the agenda this week. One is a ambitious agenda called the Space 2030 Agenda, which is an attempt to draft a document which guides the work of this committee for the next decade. A second thing that we've talked about is forming a working group under the Committee on Space Resource Utilization. And I don't know, Gabriel, I hate to force you to answer the question, but this is an area you've been working on, so maybe you can say something about that.
It is. Ever since 2015, when the United States passed a law supporting commercial use of space resources, so things mined from the moon or asteroids typically, there's been a lot of talk in COPUOS about whether COPUOS should have a particular focus on that and talk about international rules or principles that might apply. And we've worked ever since 2015 to come up with a way to sort of bring that issue in front of the legal subcommittee in particular. And I think we're going to finally reach success this week. Fingers crossed, we've got a couple more days. We're really close to being able to create a mandate and a work plan, a 5-year work plan for this working group that will really bring together a whole set of international experts, national governments, to have a focused series of conversations to come up with some international models and ideas for how every country, not just the United States and our partners, should engage in space resource utilization. So that'll be a major success because it's one of the issues that's just happening now. It's about to start beginning in outer space. It really does raise all of these new law, policy, technical questions. So fingers crossed, it should be a major success for COPUOS this year.
And
Oh, I was just going to add, and beyond the working groups, we are going through the normal agenda of the COPUOS conference. So we're addressing everything from national updates on space and water, space innovation and exploration, space and climate change. It's a whole host of issues that we receive updates from other nations, and we also deliver our own statements as well. So it's a key part of the work of the committee.
We have more questions coming in now, but I'm conscious of time, so I wanted to ask one fun one before we sign off. And this is another, looking to the future question. What will human cooperation in outer space look like in 100 years?
wow. Well, I'll start, and then Caitlin and Gabriel can correct me or provide an alternative vision. I mean, that's a really tough question, but maybe, perhaps, we'll have a future committee on the peaceful uses of outer space meeting in outer space. Maybe we will have a meeting on the moon where we're talking about where do we explore next. That's possible. That would certainly be very ambitious, very interesting. Unfortunately, I guess we won't be there to be part of that meeting, but that's a possibility.
That would be great. Maybe in 50 years we'd still be part of it, or 30 years we'd still be part of the meeting, if it happens then. Thoughts?
Oh gosh, my crystal ball is out of service today, but I can say I hope that we continue to see a good spirit of compromise and cooperation among all members of COPUOS in the future.
I think I'll try to combine your two answers and say, no, I think my real answer is I don't know, and that's the point. I don't know what humanity is going to be doing in space in 100 years, but the goal, at least for me, is to let that happen. Let whatever humanity wants to do happen in a peaceful, sustainable, and cooperative manner. So that means walking a tightrope between answering the questions that have to be answered now, creating enough rules to keep things peaceful, keep them sustainable, but not create so many rules that you stifle innovation or that you foreclose possibilities. So that's the point. I don't know the answer to your question, and it's not our job to answer it. It's the job of future generations to do what they want to do. It's our job to make that possible and keep that opportunity available to them. So that's my dodge to your question.
No, that's a good dodge. I was gonna say, that kind of summarizes why we're here, right? Mm-hmm. To make space usable for the next generation. Exactly what we're trying to do here in this committee.
And it's always good to end on a positive, optimistic note. Thank you all for your work. There's at least one question that we didn't get to, but we will respond in the chat, and if any questions come in after the Facebook Live is over, unfortunately we have to end because David and Gabriel have to get over to the COPUOS plenary, and we don't want to hold them up. So I want to say thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to the three of you for joining us today. I hope we can do it again in the future. And I guess with that, we're signing off. Unless anyone has a final last minute thought they want to get out.
Thanks for this.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming. Thanks to everyone. Until next time. Bye.